blood, shame, stigma, natural, periods, luxury. Those are the words I articulated on the House floor of the Ohio State House as a 19-year-old college student. That day, I arrived at the mission. I was going to convince all of my Ohio legislators in the room to support legislation aimed at repealing the pink tax, or the so-called tampon tax in Ohio. Under this policy, menstrual products were taxed as luxury items instead of as medical necessities. I remember that moment when I walked into the room. The first thing I noticed was that I was surrounded by a group of predominantly older white men. To be exact, I was testifying in front of a committee of 20 members, composed of 17 men and just 3 women. The second I mentioned the word period in my testimony speech, I started getting looks from all across the room. Many of the men refused to make eye contact with me and looked down at their iPads. Some of them started blushing or even squirming in their seats. A few of them even rolled their eyes at me from across the room. And I just remember standing there and pinching myself because I could not believe what I was seeing. But I left that room with an even bigger question. Why is it that our elected officials who are responsible for making legislation that affects people who menstruate can't even look me in the eyes and repeat the word period after me? The tampon tax is not an issue that's unique to Ohio alone. At the time, 35 other states also had a tampon tax. In Tennessee, male lawmakers even remarked that if tampons were made tax exempt for just 3 days, that women would go in a tampon buying frenzy, just stockpiling them and buying way too many. But we don't focus nearly enough on the negative implications behind bad policies like the tampon tax. This policy perpetuates the cycle of period poverty. That's when people who menstruate lack access to or can't afford menstrual products on their periods and are often forced to resort to using unhygienic methods of maintaining their periods, like using trash or even toilet paper. This can predispose them to fatal infections like toxic shock syndrome. But the larger picture is, this is a matter of human dignity. It should not be an act of bravery to ask for a tampon when you need one. That's when my student group and I realized that the issues of period poverty and period stigma go hand in hand. And that if we ever wanted to create long-lasting, systemic policy change to address the issue of period poverty, we needed to start by destigmatizing this issue and changing culture first, something that our generation, Gen Z, happens to be experts at. But at the same time, initially, we doubted the power of our own voices. I mean, who would ever take us seriously, right? We were just a group of student activists who were passionate about this issue. But there was one thing that we did know for sure, that at the time, this issue had little to no momentum. So we had to do something. So then for the next 2 years, we made it our mission to garner widespread public support around it. And fast forward a few months later, I had the honor of co-leading numerous national campaigns, like National Period Day, through which tens of thousands of youth activists from all across the country rallied in support of one goal: to nationally elevate the fight to end period poverty. Just 4 days after the rally held outside of the Ohio State House, legislation finally passed the Senate to repeal the tampon tax. This policy was signed into law by our governor, and it went into effect during the pandemic. Little did I know at the time that we would also go on to speak at and organize numerous press conferences, including one outside the Democratic presidential debates, which landed on the radar of 5 presidential candidates who tweeted about and endorsed our campaign, making it the second trending topic on Twitter on October 19th, 2019. For me, these experiences solidified something that I already knew, that it is up to our generation to solve the crisis of period poverty. And here's the good news. You are already part of the menstrual movement, even if you don't know it yet. And I am here to debunk 4 widely held misconceptions about what it means to be a period rights activist, to show you why you are already the menstrual movement. Misconception number 1. Menstrual justice is an isolated issue. That's false. Menstrual justice is connected to the larger fight for racial justice, gender justice, economic justice, healthcare justice, and the list goes on. Let me give a quick example. Black and brown communities are some of the most heavily impacted by the issue of period poverty. So by addressing the issue of period poverty, we are also addressing systemic racial injustices that exist in our society. And if our generation knows anything to be true, it's that we have inherited a world of injustice, a world of fear, and a world of poverty, which has prompted us to come up with permanent solutions to these issues. And that brings me to misconception number 2. In order to be an activist, you need to organize massive rallies and demonstrations and speak at protests. And I'm here to tell you that's false, because you are already an activist. While those are all effective means of activism, I think people often underestimate the simple, everyday acts of activism and the power behind that. It can be as simple as bringing it to your school's attention that the issue of period poverty is something that they need to address for the students and teachers that go to your school. It can even be as simple as having a conversation with a friend, a coworker, a family member, or even a legislator about periods, because that helps destigmatize this issue, and it has a ripple effect. That brings me to misconception number 3. Period poverty is an issue that only occurs in third world countries, but not here in the United States. And I'm here to tell you that is also false, because this issue is happening here at home. A national study revealed that more than 84% of students in the United States have reported either missing class or knowing another student who's missed class due to lack of access to period products on their period. Another study found that nearly 46% of low-income women in St. Louis were forced to choose between access to period products on their period and providing a meal at the table for their families. A natural need should not be a barrier to anyone's education, and nobody should have to make the impossible decision between 2 absolute necessities. And that brings me to misconception number 4. In order to have your voice heard, you need to be a lawyer, a lobbyist, or have a PhD in menstruation studies. And that's also false, because your story matters. In fact, some of the bravest activists I know are a group of Girl Scouts from Ohio who also testified to repeal the tampon tax. They did so by sharing their first period stories and tackling the period stigma head on. I mean, what could be more courageous and more brave and more vulnerable than something like that, right? And that's why I believe it is up to us and that our generation will solve the crisis of period poverty during our lifetimes. 30 states still have a tampon tax, but this issue is about more than just the tampon tax. It's about destigmatizing periods. Because that moment when I testified in front of my legislators, they looked at me as if I had the audacity to talk about periods. And you know what? Yes, I did. I had the audacity to look them straight in the eyes and ask, why is it that most men's exclusively used items in Ohio, like Viagra, Rogaine, suspensories, penile pumps, they're all exempt from the sales tax, whereas menstrual products, which are used far more widely and consistently by nearly half our population, are taxed as luxury items. Thousands of young people had the audacity to rally and pressure their lawmakers to prioritize the issue of period poverty. And our generation has the audacity to dream of a world where every person has the ability to reach their full humanity, regardless of a natural need. Because you are already part of the menstrual movement. Now it's about being brave enough to go out there and talk about periods, because that's how we're going to destigmatize this issue, and that's how we're going to change culture and change discriminatory policies and end period poverty. Because don't forget, you are the menstrual movement. Period.